Okay, thank you so much, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It's quite a moment and a great privilege to have the opportunity of speaking before you all in this capacity from the United States this morning. So today I will be speaking on the rise of the unicorns, essentially looking at the constructs and the mechanics which are changing the market systems as new species of companies are emerging around the beautiful continent. So we go straight. What is going on here is that we are in a Cambrian moment. A Cambrian moment of entrepreneurial capitalism, where young people are having the capacity to combine and recombine factors of production to create leverageable factors that are compounding at a very great level. Today, we have about 6-7 unicorns in Africa, but I estimate that by 2023, before we call it 31st of December 2023, there is the propensity that we may have up to 15 unicorns. So there are many drivers, there are many reasons why this is happening. One of the most critical things is that we have gotten to that point, according to Pythagoras' postulation, that the world is nothing but the business of numbers. So we have gone through the abacus, slide rule, difference engine, to the time the microprocessor has become extremely ubiquitous in whatever we are doing. So we have the capacity to process numbers, we have the capacity to calculate things. And what is going on here is that young people now are seeing a convergence, high processing power, personal computing in all our pockets, cloud computing services, making it possible that you don't need a lot of money for you to start any of these companies. And because you don't need a lot of money to start any of these companies, so many of them are going into that. And as they are doing that, they are changing the way we live. They are changing the economic architecture, and they are democratizing the systems that most of the things we use. So the world is being built, democratizing factors of production, making it possible that with just $20,000, a young man can start a business in Nairobi. With less than $15,000, somebody can start the same thing in Ogadagu. But in the old, many decades ago, you need to have tons of money for you to get into this business. And because of that, for the very first time, the mission of farms that we see in Africa had never been the way it was. So let me explain this thing in a very simple way, what is going on here. Ndubuisi had just landed in Lagos right now, and I don't have any family member in Lagos, and I'm hungry. I have two options. Either I go on being hungry, or I begin to knock at every door in Lagos looking for somebody who has food to sell to me. And there is that propensity that I can knock the first 100 houses, they don't have food to sell. But as that is happening, there is also somebody who has food, but I cannot find that individual. In markets, we say there is information asymmetry. I am hungry, the other person has food, but we cannot come into a point. So what happens? Somebody starts a company, and that company is called Mama Kemi Restaurant. So now Ndubuisi is hungry. Instead of Ndubuisi going to be knocking at every door, what Ndubuisi does, he goes to that restaurant and now go in to eat that koi, pay that Mama Kemi 5,000 naira or whatever, and now she now gives me that food. That money I paid her is the compensation for the services, the friction she's trying to solve for me, and that is her revenue. The young people who are creating the unicorns have figured out a better way of delivering that service. It's still the same construct of market system, having the ability to fix frictions in markets, but they are doing it at a higher level. How are they doing this at a higher level? They are acquiring new dimensions of capabilities. Acquiring new dimensions of capabilities will now make it possible that they can improve the efficiency upon which the production systems are organized, and they can now unleash them in markets, making things easier for their customers. If you go back to this plot here, I shared this thing in Harvard many years ago. One of the things you notice is that around 2,000 years of GDP, you see that more than 1,500 years off, the GDP of the world was flat. In other words, generations of people that lived apart did not experience any major change in their living standards. Of course, there were the Obas, the Emirs, and and overbeats. But one thing was evident: man was poor because the world was inventive. So many ideas, but there were no products or services. People were creating all the constructs, mechanical, fundamental concepts of physics and chemistry, but they were not translating those things into products and services. And because those things were not being translated into products and services, there was really no major improvement in the economic well-being of the citizens. So that means that the per capita income was decelerating because the generations of people that lived here were actually, into a large extent, poorer than people that lived here. But if you check this curve, I have used United States and China because they are the two dominant economies today. There was something that started changing. But the people that lived during this era of flattening GDP, they were also very brilliant people. They gave us the fundamental rudiments of trigonometry, algebra. They created compounds, but they could not make vaccine. When tuberculosis came, it killed them. When polio came, it killed them. Because they were inventive. For a long time, Africa has been an inventive society. So many ideas in motor parks, how to fix electricity. So many ideas in beer parlors, how to fix clean water problem. But there had not been a capacity to transition from those ideas into products and services. But something is changing. And that is the era we are now. We have called it the wave one of the innovation society era. The wave one means that we have the ability not just to have ideas, but also have the mechanism to transition from having those ideas to creating products and services. And if we do that, one of the things that we will see is that we will begin to rise. The exponential increment of the GDP of the United States, you can see here, is parabolic, ramping up from a linear one for years. China joined up. If you go across other parts of the world, the developed nations, they did the same thing. Africa is just at that elemental infancy phase. The unicorns, despite the infrastructure challenges that we have, they have figured out how to create new dimensions of financial systems even during the time of economic paralysis. Of course, you can, how can somebody create a unicorn out of Nigeria within 4 years? Like we have seen in Florida Way, like we have seen in OPay, like we have seen in all these companies that are raising millions of dollars. Even though we don't have the infrastructure, what is going on is this: the era is changing from inventive to innovation society. But as we move on from this innovation society, there is also going to be another phase that is coming. We call it the wave two. That is the age of AI, autonomous systems. And those things are now going to redesign to a large extent everything that we have known. Just because of time, I'm going to raise this thing here, just to get to this point where I want us to emphasize. The unicorns will be here because they are improving the mechanism of fixing market frictions, helping us to get to the marginal cost problem in running companies. The marginal cost here means that as they are growing, they are never going to go into the diminishing return. So if that is the case, these companies are going to do very well. The best companies out of Africa today are not Africans. And the future of the continent, if we do not deal with it, is going to be a very, very lost decade. If you go back to the history in the United States of America in 1917, the largest companies in America, they were steel construction company, the U.S. Steel. 50 years later, IBM was the largest company, publicly traded company in the United States. So you saw companies that moved from construction to technology infrastructure companies. And today, the largest companies in U.S. are knowledge-based companies, like Apple, Microsoft, and Google. If you go to the stock exchange in Nigeria, we have the same translation. You have food companies, you have construction companies like Dangote Cement, Bua Cement, you have MTN, Airtel. These are technology infrastructure companies. And then we have the Bua Foods, which are one of the above 1 trillion naira companies. So we have been in a position to combine the same trajectory of 1970, 1967 redesigns in the United States into one. But there is one thing that remains: our ability to move from these two phases into the last one, which is the knowledge era. Interestingly, Africa and Nigeria, we may have a massive dislocation because all these companies are registered not in Nigeria. They are most likely going to trade in the United States, London, and outside the country. And if that is the case, it means the creative destruction, the renewal in economic system we see in our stock exchanges every 10 years may not happen. I was still in secondary school when I started GTB. I was still in secondary school when I started all these new generation banks. When they now came, after a decade, they are now the most dominant companies in the Nigerian stock exchange because we went through the phase of the new generation banks to the age of the voice telephony, to the time of the mobile internet, to the time of the application utility area we are now. So what is going on now is that if these firms are not going to be re-domiciled in Nigeria, rather moving to the United States, by the time we need them to take over from the banks of today, which are dominant in the Nigerian stock exchange, they will not be anywhere to be found. And if that is the case, what that means is this: we are going, as a people, going to have serious challenge. So the question here is this: when this bank came, they took over and replaced the old leaders like First Bank. Now they are now the kings. And now in the decade of 20s and the decade of 2010s, the telecommunication companies came. And they are now the leaders with Airtel and MTN. So we are benefiting because they are local. They are Nigerian listed companies. Now the ones that are going to take over from them in the next decade, they are not Nigerian. And that offers a huge challenge for us. And that is actually the point I would like us to think